This is a jar of pure maple syrup that we made on our property in Newmarket, Ontario. Today what I'm going to show you to do is how you can take this maple syrup and cook it down to make maple candy. That's the finished product, so I'm going to show you how we take it from this to this. As you know, it takes a lot of energy to make this little 500 milliliter jar of maple syrup. Now what happens during the boiling process, sometimes you boil it so hot that you end up getting some sugar residue at the bottom of the jar. This is not a problem for people who know about maple syrup, but when you give this away, some people will look at the residue on the bottom of that little jar and think that there's something wrong with it, when there's nothing absolutely wrong at all. It's just sugar that's condensated at the bottom. So what I do sometimes is I will take this jar and I will take the top part off of it and reboil it and reseal it and keep the bottom part, and I'll make maple candy with it. To make maple candy, what you need to do is get a nice large stainless steel pot like this one right here. It holds about 4 liters. And what you do is you put the syrup in there and you start to boil it. Now, maple syrup boils at about 7 degrees above the boiling point of water. Maple candy will be about 20 degrees above that. So in this case, if you look at my thermometer, I'm going to take this up to about 243 to 244 degrees Fahrenheit. My graduated thermometer here going to show you at what temperature you get syrup, at what temperature that you will get the various types of, well, maple butter, maple candy, and the hard maple candy as you take it even hotter. And what you're doing is basically taking more of the water out of the syrup. When it cools, it'll cool into a candy once you get up to the right temperature. I usually boil down between 1 and 1.5 liters of maple syrup into maple candy in any particular maple candy batch. When you first start to boil the syrup, it will take a while before it will start to bubble, and you have to watch your temperature. My stove will go up to 10 and then high, but at 5 it's already starting to boil. As the syrup gets warmer, the temperature will have to decrease because it doesn't take much energy to get this syrup to boil once you get it up to 235, 240 degrees. In fact, I will probably have to take this temperature down to a 4 or a 3 and it will still boil. I now have this up to about 238, 239 degrees. That the syrup is slowly bubbling. Now, if you look at what I've got the stove set at, I've got it set as a 3, so it's not taking very much energy to boil this. It is always good to have a nice deep pot to work with, because if the syrup does start to boil over, it will boil over very quickly. So the deep pot will give you several extra seconds to get it off the heat before it boils over onto your stove and makes a complete mess. This pot is boiling quite high. I've only got really about 1.5 inches of syrup in this pan, yet I'm almost at the top of the pot. And the temperature right now is about 240 degrees, set at simmer. It doesn't take much energy once you get it to that temperature just to keep it boiling and rolling. So you have to be very careful as you approach the candy stage that you don't boil too quickly, and you'll have a mess on your hands if this boils over. I've got the temperature up to the soft sugar stage now. See, I now have it in the glass measuring bowl. And the nice thing about it has a handle and has a spout, and that'll make it easy for me to pour it into my forms, which I have in the shape of maple leaves. And you can buy these forms at various locations. I buy mine from Atkinson's, which is just north of Barrie, Ontario. Now, you can't just pour it in right away when it's still hot. You've got to let it cool a little bit and thicken, because if you pour it in right away, it will take forever to cool off, and it may not form good candy. So I always squish it around and let it cool a little bit. Once it starts to cool, it'll set up very, very fast, and if you don't get it into the forms in time, it'll get very thick and lumpy. So once it starts to set up, you got to get ready to pour it into the form. And once you pour it into the form, it won't take very long for it to cool, and you'll have the candy. Well, the nice thing about putting it in this particular glass bowl is that I can just put this glass bowl back on the element and reheat it if it gets too hard, and soften it up a little bit so I can then pour some more. Well, I've been stirring this for 3 or 4 minutes now, letting it cool down a bit and just keeping it loose. and it's starting to get a little stiff. So it's just about time to pour it into the mold. Okay, so now I'm going to pour this into the molds. The smaller mold is a little tougher to get the right amount of maple candy syrup in there. But it'll be fine once you take them out of the mold, and you'll see once I take them out how they look. But these will come out quite nicely, and they won't take very long before they'll be ready. Once they cool and they'll settle up in 10-15 minutes, I'll be able to pop them right out and you'll see what they look like. Some extra left over from this batch, so I just put it back on the stove in the glass measuring cup and let it warm back up. And once my molds are freed up, I'll just use it and finish off this particular batch. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes now, and I've already kind of loosened one off. Just to show you, take this out, and it'll pop right out like that. And the finished product looks very nice. In fact, if I take one of the smaller ones out too, again, that'll pop out very easily. You'll kind of see that they turn out quite nice. Candies. They kind of actually look like a maple leaf, the way the mold is all designed. Very sharp. So what I'll do is I will empty out these molds, and then I'll just reuse them again. I've got my other leftover stuff kind of warm in here. I'll warm it up a little bit more. Then I'll pour the rest of this into my molds, and I'll be done with this particular batch. So I've taken out all the candy out of the molds. Just put it on this tray so you can see what it looks like on the finished product. So when you look at the individual candy pieces, you can see that they look like maple leaves. So that's how you take something like this, which is the maple syrup, and turn it into something like this, which is the maple candy.